I'm all about that vax. No COVID. I'm all about that vax. No COVID. I'm all about that vax. I'm bringing party back. Yeah, we're talking about the vaccine today. All the vaccines, because they're not the vaccine. There are many vaccines. And first off, let's talk about the anti-vaxxers and why they're so afraid. And maybe why you have some reservations. Are they legitimate? Are they not? So let's look at the history of problems with vaccines first and see why we don't need to be concerned. Let's go all the way back to polio. I think I've mentioned before, my dad, when he was playing in Wisconsin, I went and looked at his yearbooks from the 1950s, and he was on the football team in high school back then, and it was there was no season. It was cut in the middle because of a polio outbreak. And it's weird for us to think about because we don't have problems with polio anymore, except a couple small places in a couple countries like India. Polio is not a concern anymore in the world. The polio vaccines have worked. But that wasn't always the case. It was a dreadful, feared childhood illness. Karl Landsteiner identified polio as the virus in 1908. Within the next 10 years, an epidemic in New York killed 2,400 people, mostly children. It was the opposite of COVID. It killed mostly children and left thousands with lifelong paralysis. It was completely debilitating. President FDR of the United States, he had paralysis to some degree for life from childhood polio. In April 1955, more than 200,000 children in western and midwestern USA states received a polio vaccine, the first one. Finally, the process of inactivating the live virus was defective. They took a live virus and inactivated that virus. I'll talk more about how viruses work in a little bit. They inactivated the virus, and they didn't do it right in 1955. Within days, there were reports of paralysis, and within a month, the first mass vaccination program against polio was completely stopped. The guy was on track to win a Nobel. He did not, although he did so many wonderful things for it, and it turned out it wasn't his fault. It was the lab that was putting it together. The vaccine that was manufactured by the California-based family firm of Cutter Laboratories, and it's called the Cutter Incident, caused 40,000 cases of polio. The vaccine caused 40,000 cases of polio, leaving 200 children with varying degrees of paralysis and killing 10. So then we went with a different oral vaccine that is alive but no longer dangerous. But that can be reactivated in the gut, in the stomach, so people were still getting polio in the US until the 1990s. We didn't use the better vaccine that was created before because Cutter Labs made a mistake. Now, this was horrible. The vaccine caused the illness it was supposed to stop. But we don't have to worry about that today. This was in 1955. Your parents weren't even born yet. American vaccines have more regulation than any other medical product today because of this incident. And in the case of COVID, we aren't inactivating a live virus. Even if we were, all over the world, we are much, much better at doing it today than the failed firm of Cutter Labs. Let's look at another example, more recent, dengue. There's a new vaccine that came out 2 or 3 years ago for this horrible disease that I personally had. Let's see, this would be almost 2 years ago now, year and a half. It chills and aches and itching all over, the horrible itching, just want to die. And the worst pain of my life, when they gave me the potassium shot here, and my whole arm was burning up. I was screaming in pain like you see in the movies from the potassium shot. Now, there is a vaccine. It was one of the first countries where it was released was in the Philippines. It turns out Sanofi Pasteur told the Philippines after the fact that they do not recommend it to those who have never had dengue before because it could cause worse dengue. The Philippines accused Sanofi Pasteur of experimenting with the two-thirds world peoples. Maybe that there's a point to that because over 600 people, mostly children, that had received at least a single dose of the vaccine have died. This was just 3 years ago. Though those 600 may not have died because of the vaccine itself, that's unclear, but the 600 kids who received one dose of the vaccine died. 600 people, mostly kids. Ironically now, it is not available in the Philippines, even for me, because Sanofi Pasteur says it's safe if you've had dengue before. But if you haven't had dengue before, it can give you dengue worse. So I could take it and be protected from the other 3 strains of dengue that I've not yet had, but it is not available in the Philippines because of what happened. And this scare caused by the controversy has been suggested as a factor in the country's loss of confidence in vaccines and the low immunization rates in the last few years, resulting in infectious disease crises in the country like a measles outbreak in 2019. Sanofi Pasteur should have tested it more. They should have they should have realized that for those who haven't had it, it could cause more problems. But the vaccines that we're going to talk about have gone through stage 3 testing, and I will explain what that is in a moment. This is important for you to understand because these are the reasons in various countries or in many countries why there is a small group of people who refuse to get their kids immunized and don't allow for herd immunity. Please understand, not everyone can get shots. Some people are allergic to eggs, and eggshells are often used to make vaccines. Some people are allergic to the vaccines itself, a very small number of people, very small. Some people have autoimmune diseases and can't get vaccines. And these people depend on the herd immunity that we've discussed before. In order to be protected, they depend on everyone else getting the vaccine. So when you or your kids don't get a vaccine, they could die. The biggest thing that's happened recently is in 1998, a gentleman by the name of Wakefield in the UK published in the medical journal Lancet a small study, not a lot of people, stage 1, phase 1, suggesting that MMR vaccine, measles, mumps, and rubella, routine vaccine that my son Darwin has taken, was linked to autism. Now, immediately after this journal article was published, studies indicated the exact opposite, questioning what happened. People questioned the logic that was laid out in the study. Remember the way the methodology works for the scientific method. You publish in a scientific peer-reviewed journal, and then other people try to duplicate your results to see if they are valid. People were finding they weren't. Wakefield published this with 11 other authors. 10 of those retracted their interpretation of the link with autism. They said, looking back at the data, they don't feel it's there. Then the journal found out that Wakefield had a financial stake in the research. He was funded by anti-vaxxer groups, and that's a no-no in scientific research, but they still supported, the Lancet journal still supported his work. In 2010, the Lancet retracted the paper after they found many errors, suddenly, 10 years later. Wakefield was then found to have been guilty of ethical violations and fudging his data, massaging it to make it look good. And then it was found that Wakefield had done deliberate fraud. His links with autism are completely invalidated now. But that was not before tens of thousands of Americans, Canadians, and Brits stopped vaccinating their kids, leading to outbreaks of measles in those countries. The MMR vaccine is safe. There is no link to autism. Some people who take the vaccine will get autism, and some people who don't take the vaccine will get autism because the vaccine doesn't give you autism. We don't completely know what gives you autism. Perhaps it's partially genetic, but it's not from the vaccine. But these are the reasons why there is this legacy of anti-vaxxers that are coming up now in response to the vaccines. And unfortunately, in America, with Donald Trump, it's become a political thing. And it shouldn't have to be, but it is. Let's turn to COVID in particular, and the COVID denier king, Tanzania. It has the worst response of anyone to COVID. Along with Nicaragua, they've done the least to try and stop it. They say it's not a problem, that we don't need to worry. They're not testing. People are dying of it in Tanzania, but they're not testing. And while the cameras were on her, Health Minister Gwajima and other health officials drank a herbal concoction with ginger, garlic, and lemons, inhaling steam from the herbs, saying this was a natural means to kill the virus, denying the vaccine. The Prime Minister himself said quote, vaccines are dangerous. If the white man was able to come up with vaccinations, he should have found a vaccination for AIDS by now. He would have found a vaccination for tuberculosis by now. He would have found a vaccination for malaria by now. He would have found a vaccination for cancer by now, unquote. It's hard to parse the logic of that statement, all the lack of logic. Some diseases are really hard to combat. Some are really hard to find a vaccine. It's not like magic. It's been amazing what we've done with COVID in 1 year. Usually it takes decades. Cancer is many different causes. And we do have a vaccine for a virus that causes HPV, which are recommended if you are that you get this if you it prevents cervical cancer if you're a girl, and it's a good idea to get that and be protected. We do have some vaccines for some cancer. We have been able to eradicate TB in many countries in the world. My grandfather was in charge of communicable diseases for Los Angeles County, and he eradicated TB back in the, I think it was the 1930s or 40s in Los Angeles County. We have made strides, but just because we can do some things doesn't mean we can do others. Secondly, the white man is not super smart and smarter than everyone else. Yes, the white man has stolen land and people and resources from the two-thirds world, and so they have more technology, but that doesn't mean that they are gods. Thirdly, the Prime Minister has a point. There is a huge legacy of racism in science and medicine and everywhere else that is our true white man burden that we need to acknowledge and be responsible for. It's just that that does not mean that vaccines are dangerous. That means that we've kind of destroyed the rest of the world. So, let's turn now to making of the vaccine. Now that we've looked at why people are concerned about vaccines in general, COVID in particular, and why they shouldn't be, let's look at how the vaccines are made. Usually this takes years or even decades, and what we humans have done, not just the white man, but white women, African American and Latinas in the United States, the Chinese, the Russians, the Brits, others as well. We've come up with vaccines in 1 year. This is a miracle, mu'ajiza. It's amazing. In 1 year that we've not just got one vaccine, we've got multiple vaccines. And it is a testimony to something good coming out of this, that we have independently all worked to this common goal, recognizing this pandemic is a horrible, horrible thing. Now, the virus, just like the cold coronavirus, keeps changing, which makes it hard to come up with a vaccine. So I want to focus on this amazing RNA vaccine that Pfizer and Moderna have, and how it works. How do we make it? The bacteria cells make the DNA of the virus. So we have bacteria cells under our control make the DNA of the virus. but only the DNA for the spike proteins that I mentioned before on the outside of the virus. That's done in the state of Missouri. Then they are in cold storage, the DNA is shipped to a lab in Massachusetts, where the DNA is turned into another form of molecule called ribonucleic acid, or RNA, and specifically messenger RNA, so for short, mRNA. Now, RNA is what the coronavirus, SARS-CoV-2, actually uses, so that's important. We take the DNA and we turn it into mRNA, and in Massachusetts, then they do a quality control check. The frozen mRNA is then shipped to Michigan, a different state, third state, and the mRNA is combined with fats in a series of filtrations. It is then sterilized, inspected again, and put into small vials and stored at sub-zero temperatures, below zero. And there's a reason that I'll get to in a moment why it has to be stored really, really cold. Remember, no one has done an RNA vaccine before. This is a new technology that we invented. Very cool. Every vial can do 5 doses. You can get a 6th dose with a special syringe, but you have to manufacture the syringe. And all of this is why it's taking so long. So how do the vaccines work? I'll tell you more in class. But how do vaccines work in general? Spike proteins, in the case of COVID, will be recognized by the immune system as foreign, just like they'd recognize the proteins of a real coronavirus. And they will then be engulfed by the white blood cells by surrounding them in phagocytosis. The cells then chop the spike proteins into small pieces called antigens and present them on their surface using other proteins. This will allow then T cells, that's T-cells, to recognize the pieces and become activated if they have a matching T cell receptor. The T cells then will activate B cells, who will then try to make antibodies to bind to the spike protein. Since the B cells don't know what a good antibody looks like, they just randomly generate antibodies similar to how evolution works. Lots and lots of different possibilities, and the ones that succeed go on, the ones that don't fail. We've actually found in studies that this approach to finding a solution by humans or by nature, using evolution and natural selection processes, is more effective at getting good results than if we purposely design something. If it doesn't work, the antibody is discarded. If it does, it's kept and improved on by another round of mutations to create an antibody which binds even better. Evolution is occurring with the cells inside your body. And the last step of this is you continue to use social distancing, hand washing, and wearing a mask. More on that in a bit. So now let's look at the vaccine types. First, you have the inactivated vaccine. Now, these are all types of vaccines, not just COVID vaccines. An inactivated vaccine uses the killed version of the germ. You might need a booster shot with an inactivated vaccine. For the seasonal flu, it takes roughly 6 months from identification of the current influenza virus to produce a vaccine. The candidate flu virus is grown for about 3 weeks to produce a hybrid virus which is less dangerous and better able to grow in chicken eggs. The hybrid virus is then injected into fertilized eggs and incubated for several days to make more copies inside with the eggs with the baby chicken fetuses inside. The fluid with the virus is harvested and the vaccine viruses are killed, and the viral proteins are then purified over several days. And that's how we make an inactivated vaccine in the case of influenza. Other examples of this type of vaccine are Hep A, polio, which I mentioned before, and rabies. The second type of vaccine is the live attenuated vaccine. This is a weakened form of the disease. And because they are so similar to the disease, they provide a strong and lasting immune response. Examples of this are MMR, measles, mumps, and rubella, mentioned earlier, chickenpox, and smallpox. The third kind is a subunit recombinant polysaccharide and conjugate vaccine. This is where you use parts of the germ, the virus or the bacteria. It gives a strong immune response to specific portions of the germ. Examples of this are HPV, Hep B, shingles, and now we come to a coronavirus vaccine, Sinovac. China's Sinovac COVID-19 vaccine is 100% effective in preventing severe and moderate infections, 78% effective in preventing mild infections, and overall effective at 50%. You have a 1 in 2 chance of not getting COVID compared to if you didn't take the vaccine at all. You're 50% better protected. This was found in Brazil's final stage trials, according to researchers in Brazil. And they have completed phase 3 trials. Let me talk a moment about what these phases mean. There are 5 phases. In phase 0 of a clinical trial on a vaccine, you have less than 15 people. In phase 1, 20 to 80 people. In phase 2, 300 to 400. And in phase 3, around 3,000 people. In phase 3, you randomly choose some patients to get the new treatment and some patients do not. And it's a double-blind study. The researchers don't know who got which vaccine, and neither do the people. So they can more effectively judge what vaccines are correct and which are not. This is considered the gold standard to know if it's safe. So when I say Sinovac has, as of February, done phase 3 trials, that's how we can know that it's safe. Phase 4 has not yet been done because this involves thousands of people and goes on for years, and of course, it's not possible, given the time element, to have done phase 4 trials. Sinopharm is another Chinese vaccine. Both of these are available here in the Philippines to frontline workers at this point. It is 79% effective overall, and phase 3 is also complete. The fourth form of vaccine in general is a toxoid vaccine. You use a toxin produced by the germ to develop antibodies. An example of this is tetanus. The fifth form is a viral vector vaccine. You use a different virus to deliver protection. An example of this is the new AstraZeneca vaccine against COVID. AstraZeneca is 62% effective. It is also available here in the Philippines. However, some EU countries have temporarily suspended the use of the vaccine after a rare blood clot disorder has shown up in some few recipients. Other EU countries have continued to use it, knowing this data. The WHO is looking at the latest information on AstraZeneca and seeing what happens, but the WHO continues to recommend AstraZeneca as safe, pointing out that you will always get some people who will get a blood clot disorder that they would have gotten anyway, even without the vaccine. And so there has been no link established with the vaccine of AstraZeneca as well. Even if there was, that does not mean that any of the other vaccines are affected by this. Note, AstraZeneca has a unique way of reaching the coronavirus and producing antibodies. AstraZeneca is cheaper, and also this way of attaching the spike protein RNA information to a different virus to inject it and go into the cell. So we have a different virus entirely that is a safe virus, takes this protein coat and brings it into the cell and follows all the same viral procedures that we talked about before. And we're using a different safe virus to do the same thing that the COVID virus does. It's amazing. This is a new thing that hasn't been done before. And the cell then responds to the RNA that it sees in this new, in this other virus, and still makes the same antibodies. The body makes the same antibodies and recognizes it when you get attacked by the real COVID virus. So it's an amazing idea. All right. After that one, we get finally the last type, and this is the interesting one: the mRNA vaccine of Pfizer and Moderna. Totally new breakthrough. It's faster to make, and the problem is, though, that the mRNA is more unstable. We can make this faster than the flu virus, but it's very unstable. But we've had this idea on how to do this for many years. The problem is, how do you stabilize mRNA? We figured out how to do it. Keep it cold. And this is why it has to be kept sub-zero. And it's why it's hard to disperse and keep and store, because you have to have a lot of money for the storage facilities. You can't just keep it in a fridge. It has to be kept super cold. And a lot of places, even the US, don't have access to this. Let's turn now to what happens when you get it. The COVID-19 vaccine requires 2 doses in almost every case. Studies show, unfortunately, as many as 50% of people would miss the second dose, just in general. You get flu-like symptoms the first time. That shows it's working. It's good, because your body is fighting back, and your body's response to fighting back, that's when we feel sick. It's your fever is going up to kill the virus. You're feeling aches and pains. It's your body fighting back against whatever sickness this is. When you get the first dose, your body's fighting back against it. You get a little sick. That's a good sign. Now, just because you don't get sick doesn't mean it's not working. That's not true. But you can feel better if you are getting sick a little bit, feeling aches, feeling tired. But people don't want to go through that again. And besides, it's so hard to get people to get the first vaccine. You got to go track them down, get them to come, and then you got to tell them a few months later, okay, do it all over again? It's hard. That's unfortunate. The good news is you get some benefit from the first shot. Pfizer is said to be 50% effective after the first shot. Not its 95% overall, but at least 50%. And the same as what Sinovac is after 2 shots. Although with just 1 shot, it's only going to be short-term immunity. So you want the long-term immunity, you want to get the second shot. We are currently doing studies, us humans, but we think that 2 doses with different vaccines give the same immunity as using the same vaccine, or in some cases, better immunity. So there's no reason you can't get a booster with a different, better vaccine a year from now. Now, why can't most of you get the vaccine? Why can't immunological children get it? Well, first off, because you are much less likely to get severe reactions. Children are 13% of cases in the US, 3% of populations, and 0.21% of deaths. In the country with the most cases by far. So, why are children less likely to get severe reactions? We don't know. Is it a different immune response? There are fewer receptors in the nose that are the gateway to COVID? We're actually unsure. We still don't know. It's a new disease. Also, though, children are a vulnerable population. We care more about you than we do about older people. I think that's right. There's a duty of care that I have as a teacher and that you have, that doctors have as well. We have to be more sure of side effects. We don't want the vaccine to trigger Miss C that I mentioned earlier. Vaccinations are coming for people your age after delay. Without them, as I said, there will be a reservoir of the virus that could lead to more outbreaks. At first, we thought kids were less likely to infect, but further study indicates young adults have higher infection rates. So, children can still infect adults. Children are less likely to show symptoms, but they can still spread. What about life after the vaccine? We don't know yet if it protects you from transmitting to others. We're still studying that. In the United States, herd immunity we expect to be 70 to 80% with vaccines and exposure by, we thought August, now we're saying May or June. Now, this is in the United States where you get herd immunity, remember, from a vaccine or being exposed to it, and there's far, far greater exposure in the US than anywhere else in the world. So the rest of the world isn't getting herd immunity by that point. The benefit of having so many people die, over 500,000 in the US, is they're going to get herd immunity quicker. Once you get herd immunity, you can stop social distancing, you can go back to schools and mosques and restaurants and theaters, and you don't need masks anymore. Yay! Once you get herd immunity. 70 to 80% of the people have been exposed to COVID, have gotten it before, or have the vaccine. Not just adults, 70 to 80% of all people. Now, before we get herd immunity, there's a lot of disagreement by experts on what is safe once you have the vaccine. You can't party like it's 1999. You're still going, hear me, please listen. You are still going to need masks and social distancing after getting the vaccine before there is herd immunity. You'll need that until there's no more COVID-19. You will still need masks and social distancing until we wipe out COVID-19. But once you have the vaccine, close contact is now safer, and even more if both people have the vaccine, but it is not risk-free. Remember, vaccines are 50% effective or 95% effective, whatever. That's still 50% chance or a 5% chance that you can get it. Some experts are saying the vaccinated can go back to restaurants and mosques while social distancing and masking. This is what the US CDC says. If you have the vaccine before there is herd immunity, you can gather indoors with fully vaccinated people without wearing a mask. St. Anthony says small, maskless, non-social distanced social gatherings at homes of all people vaccinated are okay. That's great. Small groups at a home, if everyone is vaccinated, no mask needed, no social distancing. That doesn't include you because you don't have the vaccine. You can gather indoors with unvaccinated people from one other household. So you guys, unvaccinated, if you are vaccinated with one other household, for example, if you're visiting relatives who all live together without masks, unless any of those people or anyone they live with has an increased risk of severe illness from COVID. So, if your relative who's vaccinated wants to go visit you and you're not vaccinated and they don't live with you, they can now do that. Yay! It's now safe without a mask, according to the US CDC. If you've been around someone who has COVID-19, if you've had the vaccine, you do not need to stay away from others or get tested unless you have symptoms or you're in a group setting like a nursing home. If you have the vaccine before herd immunity, according to the US CDC, you need to continue to avoid large or even medium-sized gatherings. You need to continue to social distance outside or indoors in gatherings at school. You need to continue to mask in gatherings outside, in school. You need to continue to delay all domestic and international travel. You need to continue to avoid poorly ventilated spaces like a schoolroom without the windows open. That's with the vaccine. You need to continue to do that. I'm sorry. Sorry for myself too. But social distancing and masking need to continue until we've got herd immunity. For the last bit, I want to look at the different countries. The US is leading in the vaccination race with 4% of the world's population, 20% of all cases, and 30% of vaccines administered. It has more manufacturers than most countries, and they're wealthy. We're going to spend some time looking at Morocco in class now.